I think fraud isn't necessarily the important conversation, though, and I wonder if that's a distraction.
It's not.
I also wonder if
well, that's what I'm being berated with constantly for not.
And it's
countenancing,
it's the wrong conversation, but I do wonder if it's on purpose.
Meaning what?
As Democrats keep screaming, there's no fraud, and chasing after this fraud narrative, like now the Washington Post, Trump is going after process. So there's the potential of challenging votes. Right now, the ACLU is going to be filing a countersuit to stop Trump from disqualifying hundreds of thousands of votes in Pennsylvania under what they're saying is a violation of the Bush v. Gore ruling, or the 14th Amendment more specifically, that mail-in ballots create a parallel and separate track for voting, which is a violation of the 14th Amendment. They're arguing that they put up this 100...
Which seems completely absurd to me. I mean, if that was if that was your view of the constitutionality of mail-in balloting, why didn't you introduce such a suit before the election?
Because it's lawfare. Because they want to win.
Well, exactly. So it's not logical. It's just throwing the kitchen sink at a problem when you're all but certain to be defeated.
I don't know if that.
In other words, the notion that mail-in balloting versus in-person balloting creates this separate track that it's a violation of the Equal Protection Clause, that could have been asserted without any election results in. And they didn't do it. Why didn't they do it? Because if they had won Pennsylvania, then that rationale wouldn't have been operative.
Absolutely. If they won Pennsylvania, Trump would be like, "We did it. We won. We're the best."
Right, exactly. But mail-in ballots are fine.
But that doesn't change the fact there was a Supreme Court ruling earlier, and they said we can't rule on it until it happens, and so they said kick it back, segregate the votes, and then we'll have a ruling later. So now here comes the later ruling. But the argument about mail-in voting isn't just mail-in votes are different from in-person votes. There's a bunch of nuance here. Notably, they're arguing that in Democrat districts, the election individuals, I guess, were allowing voters in these districts to cure their ballots if they had errors on them. And they weren't allowing that in other districts. Thus, Trump's team is saying, if you have one district that says you can check your ballot, we bring it to you. We go to your house and say, hey, you forgot to sign it. Okay, your ballot's valid now. And then in Republican districts, they didn't do that, creating a higher margin of failure. You've created a two-track where you're slanting things for Democrats. That's another.
Well, ballots can be cured per state law, and it takes a large volunteer effort, as far as I understand, to retrieve the person whose ballot needs to be cured. It's not just done by election officials across the board, meaning public employees. So if Republicans are not getting their ballots cured, I would think that's probably a function more of them not having as many voters that need to have their ballots cured, right? Well, I don't know the exact specifics of that, but like I said, I mean, even in Georgia, where I just was, they have a ballot curing process that was all enacted by a Republican state legislature. Sure. So, I mean, the point is, I think if you're just saying this is Democratic fraud, Georgia to me is a glaring example, or whatever, malfeasance.
Not even that.
Impropriety, however you want to call it. I mean, how do you account for Georgia? I mean, that's a big one. Pennsylvania obviously is where the election at least was called by the media over the weekend. But again, Georgia to me stands out as something that the Republicans and the Trump supporters who are going with this narrative have not even attempted to reckon with. And you even had the two Republican senators calling for the resignation of the Republican Secretary of State just because they didn't like how the election was being run. They didn't even offer any specifics. That's why I keep going back to they're just throwing the kitchen sink at a problem.
Sure. I'm not arguing that the way they're going at it is like this very slow, methodical, logic-based, solution to the problem.
I prefer when stuff is logic-based. I don't know about you.
No, I agree. What I'm saying is they're not going, okay, let's take a look at Washington State and go through the list. Now let's take a look at Wyoming and go through the list. What they're saying is, here are the states we got to win. Fire the lawyers. Like fire the missiles, not get rid of the lawyers. So obviously they're going after Pennsylvania. Why? Trump needs Pennsylvania for any kind of victory. Right. So of course he's going to go after that through every legal mean possible. And then they're also filing lawsuits in Nevada. I think they got a ton of lawsuits going out across the board in a bunch of different states. But I think there may be some. I think some of the arguments make sense. Notably, one of the biggest problems we have right now, and I have no idea what the solution is. There was a court order in Pennsylvania that in Philadelphia and Allegheny County they must allow observers within a certain distance to observe, and they defied the court order. So they counted, according to Trump's campaign, about 450,000 ballots in violation of a court order. Now, Giuliani's taken the extreme approach, saying they're all spoiled because the secrecy envelopes were destroyed already. Therefore, we don't know where these ballots came from. We have no addresses. We don't know who they are. We don't know if they were signed. And they didn't allow observers in violation of court order, disqualify them. This is why the ACLU jumped in saying, we have to sue back to stop Trump from winning this fight. If they disqualify 450,000 votes, it'll include Trump votes, but I think that'll definitely flip it for Trump.
You could just as easily call that disenfranchisement, though. I mean, the
Absolutely,
voters who
of
cast
course.
those ballots had nothing to do with what distance observers were required to stand at. So
That's true.
Why should their vote be negated?
Because we need election security. Because we don't know who those votes are, where they're from, who signed them. The secrecy ballots were destroyed. So we could do a re-election, you know?
No, we can't.
Right, exactly. So this creates a very serious problem. We can't create a system where we say straight up, you can violate a court order and count hundreds of thousands of ballots in violation of a court ruling.
I think there's some dispute over whether that order was violated in precisely the way you state.
Well, so
but like, I mean, okay, so a difference of 3 feet in terms of
no. It was
polling
dozens
observers?
of feet. It was like
I read that it was a lesser distance in at least certain.
well, there's videos of people
examples
like 50 feet away with binoculars.
Right.
And so you've got, according to Giuliani, 50 to 70 witnesses. I'm not saying you got to trust the guy. I'm just saying this is their argument. They've got 50 to 70 people who have signed on to swear under oath they were pushed out in violation of the court order allowing them to be within 6 feet. What do we do with these ballots?
Well, I mean, again, my understanding is that at least some of the time in Philadelphia, which is now in dispute, the people who came in through the public entrance to observe didn't register properly, and there were, in fact, bipartisan observers on hand. Maybe not 100% of the time. I don't know. It's a messy process.
This is what we're getting from the media. Mainstream news outlets are saying there were Democrat and Republican observers on site. Mm-hmm. Republicans never disputed they weren't on site. They're saying Republicans weren't allowed within the court order distance.
Okay.
Meaningful access is what they argued. So, of course, the media is pushing its narrative. The Trump campaign and, Trump supporting media is pushing its narrative. But I got to admit, I mean, how do you deal with the situation in that regard? Like, do we just say this time it's okay? We don't, we've got a legal dispute over these ballots. And I'll tell you this, man. At first I was like, look, I tweeted this morning, Trump is not going to prison. These people on the left who are like, Trump's going to jail. It's not going to happen. And Trump's not going to overturn this election with lawsuits. But then things started getting weird. You've got, these states are Republican legislatures. Are they just going to roll over and be like, we're going to certify the electors for Joe Biden while this dispute is going on? Or are they going to be like, no, we're not doing it? In which case, nobody gets 270.
Well, if they do that, then they'll have done something which is 100% unprecedented in all of American history. And
That's
whether
true.
they want to do that, I think is, a little bit doubtful. On the other hand, there was an effort by frantic liberals in 2016 to lobby electors to do something which at that point would have also been without precedent in U.S. history, which is that on the basis of Russian interference, they were saying that they should not seat electors for Trump in states like Pennsylvania. And it wasn't just a marginal fringe movement. I was in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. I mentioned this today on Twitter, which is the state capital, when the Electoral College met, which is usually just a formality that nobody even knows is happening. But I went on in December of 2016 to watch it happen. And you had a mass, it was a protest that had been organized at the State House to badger electors to not cast their votes in accordance with what the popular vote outcome in the state of Pennsylvania was. It would have been just a mind-blowing departure from everything that's happened ever before in U.S. history. And they were in the chamber, in the legislative chamber. They were screaming, and at the moment that the votes were certified, the electoral votes were certified, the woman right in front of me in this balcony screamed loud enough so that everybody could undoubtedly hear it. She screamed, "You just gave us Hitler!" So, I mean, when I see Democrats and liberals sort of scorning Republicans and Trump supporters now for, maybe having some histrionic interpretations of what this fraud matter consists
Right.
of.
A little bit, yeah.
I think, did you just sleep through the past 4.5 years? If anything, you made it inevitable that there was going to be this backlash.
Yep.
Where, however specious the claims are in terms of voter fraud or whatever else about the doubting the legitimacy of the election, you should have had no doubt whatsoever that those were going to flood into the public consciousness, if for no reason other than as retribution for what was done last time. Now,
At the
granted,
very
Hillary
least-
Clinton
very
did had technically concede the day after the election, and Trump hasn't yet, so it's not 100% analogous. But there were plenty of extremely influential liberals: Lawrence Lessig, Robert Reich. Go down the list. Jennifer Palmieri, who was on the Clinton campaign. I collected this at the time, so I have the quote receipts. Who were advocating for the delegitimization of the Electoral College. And, people don't forget about that. And that, I think, is a really under-emphasized component of all this. It's almost like a vengeance type thing for 2016.
Thanks for checking out this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. We do the show live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. So come back to check us out when we go live. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, hit the notification bell, and we are also available on all podcast platforms for free if you want to listen to us there. Thanks for hanging out, and we will see you all next time.